Dokstore, my family decided it would be hilarious to abandon me in a different state. Let's see if he can find his way back. They laughed and drove off. I never returned 16 years later. They tracked me down 101 missed calls. Can you imagine being left behind, utterly abandoned, by the very people who were supposed to protect you? My family, the people I shared my name with, thought it would be a hilarious prank to strand me at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming. But that wasn't just a joke. It was a brutal act of betrayal that completely shattered my world. And let me tell you, I never went back. Not for 16 long years. Hi, I'm Hazel, and I'm 28 now. Well, I was 28 when this whole nightmare began. My life was forever changed during what was supposed to be a simple family vacation to Colorado. The family that drove away laughing, convinced I'd come crawling back, eventually did find me. But by then, I wasn't the same person they'd abandoned. Not even close. Growing up in the Reynolds household meant developing skin thicker than a rhino's hide. My parents, Barbara and Richard, were convinced that constantly toughening us up with cruel jokes was somehow character building. My older brothers, Brett and Craig, soaked it all in, becoming masters of emotional torment. Someone always had to be the target, and, you guessed it, that someone was almost always me. Our family photo albums are full of moments that looked like celebrations, but for me, they felt like humiliations. My 10th birthday, where they convinced me no one was coming, only to surprise me after hours of heartbroken tears. My middle school graduation? They forgot, showed up intentionally late, then mocked my upset. High school prom night, they gave my date the wrong address. Every single time, the same dismissive chorus. Can't you take a joke, Hazel? We're just having fun. Mom's cruelty was more subtle, a slow, insidious poison. As I grew into my teenage years, it was all about backhanded compliments on my appearance. That dress would look beautiful on you if you lost 15 pounds, or your face would be pretty if you smiled more and fixed your skin. Dad, on the other hand, was direct. He just laughed the loudest, egging my brothers on, making sure I felt their collective scorn. Brett, the oldest, was 32 and already entrenched in Dad's insurance firm, being groomed to take over. Craig, 30, handled their marketing. Both had perfectly absorbed this twisted family philosophy that emotional abuse was a form of bonding. Family dinners were often a performance, a detailed recounting of the latest, hilarious prank they'd pulled on some unsuspecting colleague or friend. Just 3 weeks before our fateful Colorado trip, I'd graduated college with a graphic design degree. The unspoken expectation was that I'd slot right into the family business, designing their websites and marketing materials. But I had dreams. I'd actually expressed interest in applying for jobs at creative agencies in Chicago, where we lived. My parents? They scoffed. You can do your little art projects for the company, Mom had purred at my graduation dinner. It'll be so much more stable than trying to make it on your own. Independence was a struggle. College loans weighed on me, and my parents had strategically kept me dependent, paying for my apartment, but constantly reminding me that their support could vanish if I wasn't grateful enough. I was working part-time at a coffee shop, but nowhere near self-sufficient. This Colorado trip was supposedly a graduation celebration, a week in a rented cabin near Rocky Mountain National Park. From the moment we piled into the SUV, the air was thick with tension. Did you remember to pack a brain this time, Hazel? Craig quipped as I loaded my suitcase. Remember when she forgot her swimsuit during the Florida trip? I was 16 then. They'd refused to stop so I could buy a new one, then mocked me for sitting on the beach fully clothed for 3 days straight. The first day of driving was a parade of their usual tactics. Brett hid my phone, watching me panic before finding it in his pocket. Craig ate the lunch I'd painstakingly packed while I napped. Dad took a deliberate detour, then blamed my map-reading skills. Small, petty cruelties. I expected them, but they still stung, every single time. That night, in a hotel in Nebraska, I overheard them in the adjoining room. She's too sensitive, Mom's voice floated through the wall. The real world is going to eat her alive if she doesn't toughen up. Dad responded, maybe this trip will finally teach her to stop being such a pushover. A knot formed in my stomach. I went to sleep trying to stay positive. Just 5 more days, I whispered to myself. Then I can focus on job applications. Build my own life. I had no idea how chillingly prophetic that thought would be. Or that the next day would be the last time I ever traveled with my family. The second day of our road trip began, peacefully. Almost suspiciously so. Looking back, I should have seen it as the calm before the storm. Their pattern was always the same, sweet, then savage. We crossed into Wyoming around noon, the landscape shifting to rolling plains with mountains in the distance. We need to fill up, Dad announced, pulling into a small town called Pine Ridge. The gas station was one of those isolated places, a convenience store on the edge of nowhere, surrounded by open land. I'm going to use the restroom and grab some snacks, I told them. Anyone want anything? Brett mumbled, Coke, not looking up from his phone. Beef jerky, Craig added. Mom just waved a dismissive hand, reapplying her lipstick. Inside, I used the restroom, then took a few minutes to pick out snacks. The store was empty except for the cashier, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a name tag that read Miranda. I paid for everyone's requests, plus a bottle of water and chips for myself. You folks just passing through? Miranda asked, handing me my change. Yeah, heading to Colorado for vacation, I replied with a smile. Well, enjoy your trip, she said. Those ordinary words. They would echo in my mind for years. The last normal moment before everything shattered. I pushed open the door to the parking lot, juggling the bags of snacks, and I froze. The spot where our SUV had been was empty. I blinked, confused. Maybe I'd turned around? Was I looking the wrong way? But a quick scan confirmed the impossible. My family was gone. My first thought was Dad had just moved the car to the air pump or something. I walked around the small building, checking every corner. Nothing. They probably just went up the street to that sandwich place, I reasoned aloud, but a familiar, sickening dread was already forming in my stomach. I pulled out my phone, heart pounding, and called Dad. It rang, then went to voicemail. Mom. Voicemail. Brett. Voicemail. Finally, Craig answered on the fourth ring. Where are you guys? I demanded, trying to keep my voice from shaking. I heard laughter. Loud, mocking laughter. Oh, we're about 20 miles down the road now, he said, not even trying to hide his amusement. What? Turn around and come get me. My voice rose with panic. Let's see if she can make it back on her own. Brett's yell cut through the phone, followed by more gales of laughter. Craig, this isn't funny. Tell Dad to turn around, now. I was pacing, my heart hammering against my ribs. Check your messages, he chuckled, and hung up. A text from Brett had come through while I was on the phone. It was a photo of all of them in the car, grinning, thumbs up, with the caption, Survival of the fittest, sis. Find your way home. I called back. Immediately. Called Mom. Voicemail. Dad. Voicemail. Brett. Voicemail. They had all blocked my number. I stood there, in that parking lot, the Wyoming sun beating down, as the cruel, unimaginable reality slowly sank in. They had left me. Deliberately. In a town I'd never heard of, in a state where I knew no one. With nothing but my purse and the clothes on my back. I checked my wallet. $43 in cash, my debit card with maybe a couple $100, and my ID. My suitcase, my clothes, my toiletries, all in the trunk of their SUV. My phone battery? 18%. As the afternoon wore on, I sat on the curb, cycling through disbelief, panic, and then a searing rage. I kept checking my phone, desperate for a message saying they were turning around, that the joke had run its course. Instead, I got a group chat photo, them, at dinner, in a restaurant, with the caption, Wonder if Hazel found dinner yet? LOL. Miranda approached me cautiously as her shift ended. Honey, you've been sitting here for 3 hours. Are you okay? Her simple question broke the dam. Through tears, I explained. Your family left you here on purpose? Her incredulity mirrored my own. They think it's funny, I choked out, wiping my eyes. A character-building exercise or something. They've done things like this before, but never this bad. Do you have anyone you can call? Friends back home? She asked. I shook my head. My closest friend had just moved to California. I had no one who could drive all the way out here. The isolation my family had carefully cultivated around me, discouraging close friendships, making me utterly dependent on them, it had never felt more crushing. Night was falling. The temperature was dropping fast. My phone battery was at 8%. I had one more call to make. Dad answered. Surprisingly. Have you learned your lesson yet? He asked, no preamble, no hello. What lesson? My voice was raw from crying. That I can't trust my own family? Don't be so dramatic. Figure it out yourself. Consider this life training. He said it so coldly. Call us when you've made it back to Chicago. How am I supposed to do that with no money and nowhere to stay? I demanded, desperate. You're a smart girl. Get creative. He hung up. I stared at my phone in disbelief as it displayed one final message from my mother. This is for your own good, Hazel. You need to learn self-reliance. Then my phone died. Miranda, who'd overheard enough, stepped forward. I know someone who rents out a room. Her name's Eleanor. Let me call her for you. As darkness enveloped that tiny Wyoming town, I realized I had a choice. Desperately try to get back to the people who abandoned me, or take the first terrifying step towards something else entirely. Eleanor was a silver-haired woman in her 60s, living in a small yellow house just 3 blocks from Pine Ridge's main street. Her spare room was simple, a twin bed, a dresser, a small desk. But it was clean, and it felt safer than any option I'd imagined during my panicked afternoon. Miranda explained your situation, Eleanor said, showing me around. You can stay here tonight, and we'll figure out next steps in the morning. She lent me a nightgown and some basic toiletries. As I lay in that unfamiliar bed, I cried until no more tears would come. Part of me, the still naive part, still expected to wake up to apologetic texts, missed calls, my family finally realizing they'd gone too far. Morning came with no such reprieve. Eleanor let me use her landline to call my parents' number, which I still knew by heart. No answer. I tried the family business line. The receptionist said my parents and brothers were in a meeting and took a message. They never called back. I need to charge my phone and check my bank account, I told Eleanor over the simple breakfast she'd prepared. I need to figure out how to get back to Chicago. But when I finally got my phone working again, the messages waiting for me only confirmed what I was beginning to accept. This joke wasn't ending anytime soon. Day 2 of Hazel's great adventure. Read a text from Brett with a photo of them hiking in Colorado. Have you started hitchhiking yet? From Craig. And then, the most devastating, from my father, called your apartment manager. Rent's not being paid while you're figuring this out. Consider it motivation. My mother had added, this is what tough love looks like, honey. You'll thank us someday. I checked my bank account. $237.42. Not even enough for a bus ticket back to Chicago, let alone first and last month's rent on a new place. When Eleanor found me on the porch steps, staring blankly at my phone, she asked gently, bad news. They're not coming back, I said, my voice hollow. And they've stopped paying for my apartment. I have nowhere to go back to. Instead of the pity I expected, Eleanor's face showed something closer to determination. Then you stay here until you figure out your next move. I charge $300 a month for the room, but you can work at my bookstore to cover it until you get on your feet. My bookstore, Pages and Poems on Main Street. I could use help a few days a week. It doesn't pay much, but it's something. That afternoon, Eleanor showed me around the small bookstore she'd owned for 30 years. It was charming, yes, but clearly struggling with outdated signage and a barely functional website a nephew had slapped together years ago. I also need a job that pays actual money, I told her, for food and to save up for what's next. The next day, I applied at every business in downtown Pine Ridge. By sunset, I had a waitressing job at the Pinewood Diner, working the breakfast and lunch shift 6 days a week. My first week passed in a blur of exhaustion and periodic crying jags. I worked from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the diner, took a short break, then helped Eleanor at the bookstore until closing. Every night, I checked my phone. Every night, the messages from my family became more sporadic, less apologetic. Still waiting for that call saying, you've made it home, my dad texted on day 5. By the end of the second week, they'd stopped messaging altogether. My diner coworker, Amber, found me crying in the break room after a shift one day. At 25, she was a single mother working 2 jobs, and she recognized the look of someone at the end of her rope. "Family trouble?" she asked, sitting beside me. The whole story poured out of me, the years of jokes, the abandonment, the callous texts. When I finished, Amber was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that shifted my entire perspective. "Sounds like they did you a favor by leaving you here." "What?" I sniffled. "Those aren't pranks, Hazel. That's abuse. And now you have a chance to build a life without it." That night, a decision solidified within me. I wasn't going to desperately scramble back to Chicago. I wasn't going to beg for the return of a family that had proven, repeatedly, they didn't care about my well-being. I was going to stay in Pine Ridge. At least for now. The next day, I used the bookstore's computer to email my college professors, explaining my situation and asking for references. I created a new email address, one my family didn't know. I started researching how to replace my ID documents, which were still in my Chicago apartment. "You're good with design, right?" Eleanor asked me one evening as we were closing up. The store could use new flyers and maybe some social media help. It was the first chance I'd had to use my degree since graduating. I created a fresh, modern flyer for an upcoming author event, and Eleanor was thrilled. "This is wonderful. You should meet Mason," she said. "He does web development for businesses around town. He might have some work for someone with your skills." Mason turned out to be a bearded 30-something, working remotely for tech companies, choosing Pine Ridge for its low cost of living and outdoor access. He took one look at my college portfolio and nodded approvingly. "I could use someone to handle the visual side of some client projects," he said. "I'm terrible at anything artistic. Want to learn some coding while you're at it? Might make you more marketable." For the first time since being abandoned, I felt a glimmer of hope. Not just for survival, but for building something meaningful. My family had thrown me away, expecting me to come crawling back. Instead, I was finding my footing on my own terms. As my first month in Pine Ridge closed, I received one final text from my mother. "This silence is very immature, Hazel. Call us when you've grown up." I blocked their numbers, one by one, and turned my focus toward the future. Downtown Pine Ridge was just 4 blocks of businesses, with the Pinewood Diner at one end and Pages and Poems near the other. Between my shifts at both places, I quickly became a familiar face. People stopped asking if I was just passing through and started greeting me by name. "Morning, Hazel," became a regular chorus as I hurried from the diner to the bookstore. Eleanor's bookstore website was my first real project. Working evenings with Mason's guidance, I rebuilt it from scratch, adding an online ordering system and a clean, modern design that highlighted upcoming events and local author spotlights. "This is incredible," Eleanor exclaimed when I revealed the finished site. "Business is up 15% since you put those event posters in the window, and this will help even more." Mason was equally impressed. "You've got a natural talent for UI design," he told me after our third coding session. "You're picking this up faster than most of my clients ever do." At the diner, Amber introduced me to her circle of friends, other young people who'd either grown up in Pine Ridge or landed there seeking an affordable, close-knit community. For the first time in my life, I was making genuine connections with people who seemed to like me for who I was, not what I could do for them, or how I could entertain them at my own expense. During my second month, I received an email from my Chicago landlord, asking about my plans for my belongings. I'd missed 2 months of rent, and they needed to clear the apartment. "I can't afford to come get anything," I wrote back. "Please donate whatever's useful and dispose of the rest." It was a painful email to send, surrendering the physical remnants of my previous life. But it was also strangely liberating. The possessions my family had given me always came with strings attached, with reminders of how grateful I should be. Starting fresh meant freedom from those constant debts of gratitude. Mason connected me with a small business owner in a neighboring town who needed logo design and marketing materials. It was my first freelance client. The pay was modest, but the sense of accomplishment was enormous. "You should think about building this into something real," Mason suggested over coffee one morning. There's no decent design agency within 100 miles, and these small businesses need the help. They're all trying to establish online presences without the skills to do it properly. The idea took root. By my third month in Pine Ridge, I had 3 regular freelance clients, alongside my work at the diner and bookstore. I'd saved enough to move out of Eleanor's spare room and into a tiny studio apartment above the hardware store on Main Street. It was barely 400 square feet, but it was mine. The first space I'd ever had that wasn't contingent on my family's approval. The morning I moved in, I bought a small potted succulent as a housewarming gift to myself. "This is the first day of your new life," I told myself, placing it on the windowsill. No more looking back. That same afternoon, my phone rang with an unfamiliar Chicago number. Thinking it might be about my old apartment, I answered. "Hazel, it's Brett. Don't hang up." My hand tightened around the phone. "What do you want?" "We're worried about you," he said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "It's been 3 months. The joke's over." Joke. The word ignited something inside me. "You abandoned me in another state with no money and no way home. You cut off my apartment." "That's not a joke, Brett. That's cruelty." "Come on, we thought you'd find a way back within a week. When you didn't call, we figured you were just being stubborn." "I'm not coming back, Brett," I said firmly. "I've started over. Don't be ridiculous." "What are you doing for money? Where are you living?" The familiar condescension in his voice fueled my resolve. "I have a job, actually. Plus freelance design clients. I have my own apartment. I'm doing fine without any of you." There was a long pause. "Mom and Dad want to talk to you." "I don't want to talk to them. Or you. Don't call me again." I hung up and immediately blocked the number. Then I sat on my new second-hand couch, shaking with a mixture of anger and fierce pride. They had expected me to fail, to beg for rescue. Instead, I was building something they had never believed I could. Over the next few months, they tried reaching me through various means: emails from new addresses, calls from different numbers, even a letter to the diner after someone apparently told them where I worked. I ignored them all. By the 6-month mark, I had built enough of a client base to quit the diner and focus entirely on design work and helping Eleanor. Mason and I had developed a business partnership, with him handling web development and me managing design for joint clients. "You know what you should do?" Mason said one evening as we finished a client project. "Register a business name. Make this official." The next day, I filed paperwork for New Horizon Design Studio. As my first year in Pine Ridge approached, I found myself reflecting on how completely my life had transformed. The scared, stranded young woman crying outside a gas station was now a business owner with friends, colleagues, and a community that valued her. The family that had discarded me had inadvertently given me the push I needed to discover my own strength. When Eleanor hosted a small gathering at the bookstore to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of my redesigned website and, privately, my year in Pine Ridge, I looked around at the faces of people who had become my chosen family. Amber with her young son, Mason, the regular bookstore customers who had become friends, even Miranda from the gas station. I realized I had built something my biological family had never given me, a circle of genuine connection, based on mutual respect, rather than power and humiliation. "To new beginnings," Eleanor toasted, raising her glass of sparkling cider. "And to finding home," I added, my voice thick with emotion, "in the place you least expected." 2 years after being abandoned in Pine Ridge, my design business had grown enough that I occasionally traveled to meet with larger clients in nearby cities. It was during one such trip to Denver that my carefully constructed new life collided violently with the past I'd been avoiding. I was sitting in a coffee shop near the 16th Street Mall, preparing for a client meeting, when a familiar voice cut through the ambient noise. "Hazel, is that you?" I looked up to see my brother Brett standing 3 feet away, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. He was in a business suit, clearly in Denver for work himself. "Brett," my voice came out steadier than I felt. "Holy sh*t, it is you." He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down without asking. "We've been looking for you for over a year." "I wasn't lost," I replied, closing my laptop. "I chose to stay away." Brett looked me over, taking in my professional attire, the portfolio beside my computer, the confidence I now carried. You look different. I am different. I took a sip of my coffee, hoping it would hide the trembling in my hands. What are you doing in Denver? Insurance conference. Dad and I are presenting tomorrow. He leaned forward. Hazel, you need to come home. This has gone on long enough. This isn't a standoff, Brett. This is my life now. I have a business, clients, friends. In Wyoming, he scoffed. Come on. Yes, in Wyoming. The place you all left me for, Dad. Don't be so dramatic. We knew you had your phone and money. I had $43 and a phone that died the same day you abandoned me, I said, my voice flat. You cut off my apartment. You left me with nothing. Brett had the decency to look uncomfortable. Look, things got out of hand. We thought you'd find a way back within a few days, a week tops. When you didn't call, Dad figured you were staying with a friend, teaching us a lesson. By the time you realized I really wasn't coming back, it had been 6 months. And then you started looking for me out of concern? The skepticism in my voice was clear, dripping with sarcasm. Mom was worried sick. She couldn't sleep. Strange, since she texted me that abandoning me was tough love and I should grow up. Brett sighed. Can we start over? The family misses you. Dad's retiring next year, and he wants to make amends before he does. Make amends? I gave a short, humorless laugh. For a lifetime of humiliation disguised as humor, culminating in abandonment? How exactly does he plan to do that? Just come back for a visit. See everyone. They've changed, Hazel. Years of suppressed emotions, the hurt, the anger, the crushing sense of betrayal, suddenly rushed to the surface. They haven't changed, Brett. And neither have you. You're sitting here in another state, trying to convince me that deliberately leaving your sister stranded was somehow justified. That I should just forgive and forget because it's convenient for all of you now. My voice had risen, and nearby customers were glancing our way. I didn't care. Do you have any idea what that felt like? To stand in that parking lot, realizing my family had decided I was disposable. To see those texts laughing about whether I'd found dinner while I was panicking about where I would sleep. Brett's expression hardened. Keep your voice down. You're making a scene. A scene? That's what you're worried about. I stood up, gathering my things. This conversation is over. Brett grabbed my wrist. You don't get to walk away. The family has been worried sick. Do you know what people think happened to you? There are rumors you had a breakdown. That you're living on the streets. Is that what you want people to think? I yanked my arm free. I don't care what people think. I care about building a life where I'm not constantly belittled and manipulated by the people who are supposed to love me. You always were too sensitive. Brett snapped, his friendly facade crumbling. This is why we had to toughen you up. You fall apart at the slightest criticism. Criticism? I was nearly shouting now. You call abandonment criticism. You call mocking a terrified young woman toughening her up. If you don't come home willingly, Brett threatened, his voice low, I'll tell everyone what really happened. How you had a meltdown over a simple joke and ran away from your family. How you've been hiding out all this time, ignoring your dying father's attempts to reconcile. Dad is dying? For a moment, concern overrode my anger. Brett's slight hesitation told me everything. He's not in good health, he amended. You're lying again. I shook my head in disgust. Goodbye, Brett. As I walked out of the coffee shop, Brett called after me, this isn't over, Hazel. The family has a right to know where you are. I made it to my rental car before the tears came. But they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. The encounter had ripped open wounds I thought had healed. But it had also crystallized something incredibly important. I wasn't the one who needed to apologize or make amends. I wasn't the one who had done something unforgivable. I called my client and rescheduled our meeting, then drove straight back to Pine Ridge, my mind racing the entire 3-hour journey. Brett knew I was in Wyoming now. It wouldn't take much for him to figure out which town if he started asking around. The next morning, I went to Eleanor's house and told her everything about the encounter with Brett, his threats, my fears that my family might try to intrude on the life I'd built. They can try, Eleanor said firmly, her eyes blazing with protective fire. But this is your home now, Hazel. We've got your back. That afternoon, I gathered my closest friends, Eleanor, Mason, Amber, and a few others, and shared the full, unvarnished story of my family's abuse and abandonment. Details I'd kept vague until now. If any of you get calls or questions from people looking for me, I concluded, now you know the truth. These people sound toxic as hell, Amber said, squeezing my hand. We won't let them near you if you don't want to see them. Their unwavering support strengthened my resolve. I returned to my apartment and wrote a long email to my parents and brothers. The first contact I'd initiated in 2 years. I'm safe and successful, I wrote. I have built a life without your cruelty and manipulation. I do not want reconciliation. I do not want contact. Any attempt to force yourselves back into my life will be met with legal action. This is not negotiable. I hit send, then blocked their email addresses once more. That night, lying awake in my apartment, I realized that the encounter with Brett, painful as it had been, had given me something invaluable: certainty. There was no doubt left, no lingering question of whether I had overreacted or whether my family might have changed. They were exactly who they had always been. And so was I. Except now I was stronger. Strong enough to walk away from toxicity, even when it came from the people who were supposed to love me most. Strong enough to build a life on my own terms. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt since the day I was abandoned. I opened my laptop and began designing a new logo for New Horizon Design Studio. One that symbolized not just a business, but a profound personal transformation. I was no longer defined by what had been done to me, but by what I had created from the ruins. 5 years after the day my family abandoned me in Wyoming, I stood in the newly expanded offices of New Horizon Design Agency, watching as my team of 10 employees collaborated on projects for clients across 3 states. What had begun as a desperate need to survive had evolved into a thriving business, specializing in branding and digital presence for small to mid-sized companies throughout the Mountain West region. Our offices occupied the entire second floor of a renovated historic building on Pine Ridge's Main Street, a far cry from my early days, working from a corner of Eleanor's bookstore. The exposed brick walls displayed framed examples of our best work, and large windows overlooked the town that had become my true home. The Denver client just signed off on the final designs, announced Megan, my first full-time hire and now creative director. They want to talk about phase 2 next month. That's our 3rd major contract this quarter, I replied, unable to keep the pride from my voice. Schedule the meeting and let's start brainstorming expanded services we can offer them. My phone buzzed with a text from Sam, the community college professor I'd been dating for the past 2 years. We'd met when he came into Pages and Poems looking for books on local history for a course he was teaching. Eleanor had introduced us, and after months of friendly conversations that gradually deepened into something more, we'd become inseparable. Dinner at 7. I'm cooking that pasta you like, his message read. Can't wait. Bringing dessert, I replied. At 33, I had built a life that felt authentic and meaningful. My closest friends had become family. Eleanor was like the supportive mother I'd never had, and Amber's son, Tyler, called me Auntie Hazel. Mason and I had developed a professional partnership that complemented both our skills, with our businesses often collaborating on larger projects. 3 months earlier, Sam and I had purchased a small house together on the edge of town, a charming craftsman with a studio space where I could work from home when I wanted to, and a garden that was slowly taking shape under our inexperienced but enthusiastic care. I was locking up the office that evening when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would let unknown calls go to voicemail, but we had several new client prospects, so I answered. Is this Hazel Reynolds of New Horizon Design? A woman's voice asked. Yes, it is. How can I help you? My name is Jennifer Atkins. I'm an editor at Business West magazine. We're doing a feature on women entrepreneurs who've built successful businesses in unexpected places. Your agency was recommended to us multiple times during our research. The interview she requested led to a 4-page spread in the magazine 3 months later, featuring photos of our office, my team, and me standing confidently in front of the business I'd built from nothing. The article told the story of a young designer who had moved to a small Wyoming town and identified an unmet need for professional design services in rural communities. I had shared only the broad strokes of my journey with the magazine, omitting the abandonment and family estrangement. Those details belonged to me, not to public consumption. But the piece emphasized how I had arrived in Pine Ridge with almost nothing and built something substantial through determination and community support. 2 weeks after the magazine hit newsstands, the emails began arriving. First from my mother, then my father, then each of my brothers. Subject lines ranged from "We need to talk" to "I saw your article" to "Please respond." I deleted them all without reading. Then came the phone calls to the agency, which my office manager fielded with the instructions I'd given her years ago. "Ms. Reynolds does not accept personal calls from these numbers." I thought that would be the end of it, but I underestimated my mother's determination. On a Tuesday afternoon, I returned from lunch to find Barbara Reynolds sitting in our reception area. Looking older, yes, but just as impeccably put together as I remembered. "Mom," I said, stopping in the doorway. "How did you find me?" She stood, smoothing her expensive slacks. "The magazine article had your business address." Her eyes tracked over me, noting my professional attire, my confident posture. "You look well." "I am well," I replied, my voice neutral. "Why are you here? Can we talk somewhere private?" I considered refusing, telling her to leave and never come back. But after 5 years of healing and growth, I found I was more curious than afraid. What could she possibly have to say that would matter now? "My office," I said, leading her down the hallway past curious employees who had no idea of the significance of this visitor. Once the door closed behind us, Barbara took in the awards on my wall, the view from my window, the undeniable evidence of success all around. "This is impressive," she admitted. "The magazine didn't do it justice." "Thank you," I said, remaining standing. "But I doubt you came all this way to compliment my office." Barbara's composure cracked slightly. "We've been trying to find you for years, Hazel. Your father hired a private investigator after Brett saw you in Denver, but you'd covered your tracks well." I wasn't hiding, I corrected her. I was living my life. "There's a difference." "We made a terrible mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "What started as a stupid prank went too far, and then pride and stubbornness kept everyone from admitting it. By the time we realized how serious it was, you were gone." "It wasn't just the abandonment," I said quietly, the words feeling heavy on my tongue. "It was a lifetime of cruelty disguised as humor. It was teaching me that love meant enduring humiliation. It was creating a family dynamic where someone always had to be the target." Tears welled in my mother's eyes. "I know. I see that now." She reached into her purse and pulled out a tissue. "Your father would never admit it, but when we saw that magazine article, you building this successful business, looking so confident and happy, it forced us to face what we'd done. Not just that day in Wyoming, but your whole life." "What do you want from me, Mom? Forgiveness? A family reunion?" "I want a chance," she said simply. "A chance to know the woman you've become. A chance to be better than I was." I studied her, looking for the manipulation that had characterized our relationship for so long. Instead, I saw something unfamiliar, genuine regret. "I can't give you what you want," I said finally. "Too much has happened. But I can tell you that I'm happy here. I've built a good life with good people who value me. And knowing that should be enough." Barbara nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "Your brothers want to see you. Your father, too, though he'd never ask." "I'm not ready for that," I told her. "I may never be ready. And that has to be okay." She stood to leave, then hesitated. "You were always the strongest of us all, Hazel. It just took us losing you to realize it." After she left, I sat at my desk for a long time, processing the encounter. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no falling into each other's arms with forgiveness and tears. Just the beginning of a recognition that the past couldn't be undone, but perhaps it could be acknowledged. That evening, as Sam and I sat on our porch watching the sunset, I told him about my mother's visit. "How do you feel about it?" he asked, his arm around my shoulders. "Surprisingly peaceful," I replied. "For so long, I was defined by what they did to me. Today, I realize that chapter truly is closed. I'm not the abandoned daughter anymore. I'm just Hazel. Business owner, community member, partner." I turned to smile at him. "And I like who I've become." The next day, I sent my mother a brief email with a single photo attached, me with my team outside our office building. No invitation to visit again, no promises of reconciliation, just a glimpse of the life I'd built, the person I'd become. It was all I was ready to give. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. 16 years after being abandoned at that Wyoming gas station, I stood in my kitchen staring at a certified letter that had just arrived. The return address was from a law firm in Chicago that I didn't recognize. With a sense of trepidation, I opened it. "Dear Miss Reynolds," it began. "We represent the estate of Richard and Barbara Reynolds. We are writing to inform you that Reynolds Insurance Group has been sold, and as per your parents' instructions, the proceeds are to be divided equally among their 3 children." I sat down at the counter, my legs suddenly unsteady. The letter continued with legal details and a request for contact to arrange the transfer of funds, a substantial amount, according to the preliminary figures included. Sam found me still sitting there 10 minutes later when he came home from work. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down his briefcase. "My parents sold the family business," I said, passing him the letter. "They're splitting the money between Brett, Craig, and me." Sam read quickly, his eyebrows rising at the amount. "That's unexpected." "There's more," I said, holding up an envelope that had been enclosed with the legal documents. A personal letter from my mother. I hadn't opened it yet, unsure if I wanted to know what it contained. In the years since Barbara's visit to my office, our contact had been minimal. Occasional emails, a Christmas card once or twice. I had maintained firm boundaries, rebuffing attempts at deeper reconciliation while acknowledging the small steps toward change I had observed. "Do you want me to leave you alone to read it?" Sam asked. I shook my head. "Stay, please." The letter inside was handwritten on my mother's personal stationery. "Dear Hazel," it read. "By the time you receive this, the sale of the business will be complete. Your father has finally retired, somewhat against his will, as his health isn't what it once was. We've decided to move to Arizona for the climate. Before we leave Chicago, we're hosting a family gathering at the house. Brett and Craig will both be there with their families. Brett has 3 children now that you've never met. Craig got married last year. I know you've kept your distance, and I understand why, but things have changed, Hazel. Your father may not say it in so many words, but the decision to include you equally in the proceeds from the business sale was his. He recognizes, in his way, the gravity of what happened all those years ago. We would very much like you to attend the gathering next month. No pressure, no expectations, just a chance to close old chapters before new ones begin. With love, Mom." She had included the date, time, and address, along with her cell phone number. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. "Are you going to go?" Sam asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to see what 16 years has done to all of them. Another part thinks it's better to leave the past in the past." Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about the invitation constantly. New Horizon Design was thriving, with offices now in 3 states. Sam and I had been married for 8 years, with twin daughters who had just turned 6. My life in Wyoming was rich and fulfilling, built on genuine connections and mutual respect. Did I want to risk reopening old wounds? Did I want my daughters to know the family that had discarded their mother so carelessly? What would you tell Lily and Emma if they asked why they've never met your parents? Sam asked one night as we discussed the invitation again. It was a fair question. Our daughters knew about Sam's family, who visited a couple times a year from Montana. They had asked about my family occasionally, and I'd always given vague answers about them living far away. I would tell them that sometimes families hurt each other in ways that can't be easily fixed, I said slowly. But I would also tell them that people can change, and that forgiveness is possible, even without forgetting. "Do you believe that?" Sam asked. "That your family has changed?" I thought about the tentative emails over the years, the careful respect for my boundaries, the equal inheritance that could have easily excluded me. "I think they've tried," I said finally. "Whether it's enough, I don't know." After much deliberation, I decided to attend the gathering, but on my terms. I would go alone, leaving Sam and the girls in Wyoming. I would book a hotel, rather than staying at the family home. and I would limit my visit to just the day of the event, flying in that morning and out the next. The house looked exactly as I remembered it, a large colonial in one of Chicago's affluent suburbs. As the Uber dropped me off, I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked up the familiar path to the front door. My mother answered my knock, her face lighting up with carefully restrained joy. "Hazel, you came." "I did," I said, accepting her brief hug with what composure I could manage. The gathering was smaller than I expected, just my parents, my brothers, and their immediate families. Brett's 3 children raced around the backyard while Craig's wife, Allison, helped my mother bring food to the patio table. My father stood when I entered the backyard, looking much older than I remembered. The competent, sometimes cruel man who had dominated my childhood seemed diminished somehow, his frame thinner, his movements more careful. "Hazel," he said, his voice gruff with emotion he'd never been comfortable showing. "Dad," I replied with a nod. The initial awkwardness gradually eased as the afternoon progressed. Brett's children, curious about their aunt who lived in the mountains, peppered me with questions about Wyoming. Craig, more subdued than I remembered, asked thoughtful questions about my business. No one mentioned the abandonment directly, but it hung in the air between us, the unspoken reason for our 16-year separation. After dinner, as the sky began to darken, my father asked if I would join him in his study, once a forbidden territory, where he conducted business and family disciplinary conversations. "I'm not good at this," he began once we were seated. "But I owe you an apology, Hazel. What we did, what I allowed to happen, it was unforgivable." I studied him. This man who had shaped so much of my early life through fear and criticism. "Why did you do it?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for years. He was quiet for a long moment. "My father was cruel to me," he said finally. "He called it toughening me up." I thought that's what fathers did. What families did. It wasn't until you were gone, really gone, that I began to see how wrong it was. It wasn't a complete answer, and it certainly wasn't a sufficient excuse. But it was honest in a way my father had never been with me before. "I built a good life," I told him, "despite everything." "I know," he said, nodding. "I followed your company online. You've done well for yourself. Better than any of us expected." "That was part of the problem," I said quietly. "Your expectations. They were always about what I couldn't do, never what I could." He looked down at his hands. "I was wrong about many things." It wasn't the emotional reconciliation scene from a movie. There were no tears or dramatic embraces, just a quiet acknowledgement between 2 adults that mistakes had been made, harm had been done, and lessons had been learned. When I left Chicago the next day, I didn't know if I would ever return. I didn't know if the tentative connections re-established over that revisit would grow or wither. But I knew that I had faced my past without being diminished by it. That I had shown my family not just that I had survived without them, but that I had thrived. Back in Wyoming, as Sam and the girls welcomed me home with hugs and questions about my trip, I felt a sense of completion. The abandoned young woman at the gas station had completed her journey. Not by finding her way back to those who had discarded her, but by creating a life so full and rich that she could face them as an equal, undiminished by their past cruelty. That night, after the girls were asleep, Sam and I sat on our back deck, looking at the stars visible in the clear Wyoming sky. "Did you find what you were looking for?" he asked. "I think so," I replied. "Not forgiveness, exactly. But closure. The understanding that what happened shaped me, but it doesn't define me anymore." I thought about all the ways my life had changed since that day 16 years ago. The business I'd built, the family I'd created, the community I joined. None of it would have happened if my family hadn't made their cruel joke. Sometimes, the worst things that happen to us lead us to the best versions of ourselves. Sometimes being left behind is the first step toward finding your way forward. Have you ever experienced a moment when something incredibly painful ultimately led you to something far better? Share your story in the comments below. Life has a way of revealing its purpose in the most unexpected ways, and I'd love to hear how that's played out for you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if my journey resonated with you. Remember, sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you're born into. Thank you for being part of my journey, and I wish you strength and peace on yours.